The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, where we will discuss how you can protect your data from ransomware with Veeam. Jason Werner, a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Veeam, is joined by fellow Veeamer Chris Hoff, a Data Protection and Ransomware Marketing Manager, and Matt Ellsbury of South Georgia Medical Center to discuss how Veeam's modern data protection allows you to quickly recover your data. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit your questions during our conversation using the Q&A panel. We will address these questions during the Q&A portion at the end of today's event. We encourage you to chat any questions you have throughout the discussion. With that, I'll throw it over to Jason to get things started.
Wonderful, and thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for joining us today. It's great to have you with us, and a big thank you for Matt for being with us today. We know you'd rather hear from somebody that's deep in the trenches in data protection in the real world than just we here at Veeam, so it's always great to have somebody with that hands-on experience. Thanks, Matt, for joining us.
My pleasure.
So to kick things off, I thought I'd start by providing a couple of very interesting talking points and discussion points around healthcare. I'm going to share these in the spirit of on two lines. Number one, this is Veeam research that we've conducted, and we do a lot of research, and I would encourage you to use it in two ways. Number one, it's great third-party validated. We don't do the research. We contract with independent researchers to get feedback and get the state of the state. And we've been able to look at healthcare on a couple of different axes that I think are very interesting. I encourage you to use it for discussions with your team, discussions to drive higher level discussions with your upper management. Use it for budgetary planning, and also as a benchmark to look at what your peers are seeing within their organization. It's always good to know kind of where you stand on things versus the rest of the industry. After that, Matt's going to share a little bit about his experience. He's been fighting ransomware like the rest of you for a bit, and has some very good insight on what they are doing within their organization, what their key requirements and goals have been with ransomware. And then Chris is going to take us home. He's going to talk not so much on the technical side, but really about the strategies and how Veeam can provide a solution that helps you address and protect and recover from ransomware. At the end, we will do Q&A, but please, again, go ahead and submit them through the chat. So a couple of things. Veeam for years has continued to study what we call the availability gap. And this is simply a measure. We ask IT leaders, both on the technical and business side, we ask them, are you able to meet your committed SLAs, your service level agreements? And compare what that SLA is versus how quickly you can return to productivity. And we call that the availability gap. That is that perception of how quick we can return to productivity. That number continues to climb, unfortunately. And with healthcare, if we just target the healthcare answers to this big report this study we've done, healthcare is actually 6% higher than the global number, and that's a little concerning. So Matt, as the lone representation of healthcare IT professionals, is the gap really that big out in the industry, especially in healthcare?
Yeah, I would have to agree with that, especially from what we see here.
Lots of challenge. Healthcare, obviously, you're dealing, I mean, not to put things too lightly, but sometimes life and death scenarios where data at the fingertips of providers during treatments and procedures in their operatories could literally be quite devastating. And so healthcare, that is a concern. Now we recognize there are different challenges in healthcare, funding, for instance, legacy equipment, and architecture that is pretty prevalent these days. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But as a result of that, that same study says that about 25% of healthcare organizations have been looking to change their backup solution. And when we asked them why, 14 were looking to preserve to improve the results, but a lot of them also were looking to contain costs. And cost containment is a pretty big issue within healthcare IT, isn't it, Matt? Especially at data protection.
Yeah, in healthcare, IT is not in the limelight. You know, your physicians and all of your other life-saving stuff is. I mean, that's where the focus is. So it's a struggle sometimes in IT to get what you need as far as funding.
Yeah, and it's an interesting paradox given that the technology is such a big part of that patient caregiving. And in fact, you know, we also found that within IT organizations, 42% consider workload or hybrid workload protection as one of the most important aspects of enterprise backup. Not surprising, the cloud is everywhere. People are adopting it. Healthcare's lagging a little bit in some aspects, but it's interesting to contrast that move to the cloud, which is, you know, progressive and let's get modernize our architecture. But when you look at data protection, we also found that almost 3/4 of those polled are still relying heavily on scripts to perform their backup and their disaster recovery, their recovery operations. So it's this great move to modernize our architecture, but I think we still within the sector, the healthcare sector, still have a lot of room for the automation, the management, and simplifying how backup happens and how restoration happens. And with limited budgets, I mean, that's a direct correlation. You're paying more people to do more manual things that's taking longer. And there's a lot more room for error and uncertainty as you look at backup. And then obviously the critical aspect of that is the recovery. So great move in architecture, still lacking a little bit on the automation and the modernization of how things happen with backup. This is an interesting data point, and I think this will, for our audience, Matt, will be may hit a little close to home. We have a multitude of roles on this call right now. This is a stat that I'm going to pull from Veeam's latest 2022 ransomware trends report. And by the way, I'll have links to all of these reports at the end that you can use for your personal use and study. But in general, we ask the audience and mixed audience, everything from the person that's in the trenches doing the backup administration all the way to the chief information security officer, how integrated are your is backup into your cybersecurity teams? How integrated is the operations, and does it need improvement? Kind of what's the state of the state? Now I'll give you the short story. The green numbers are, yeah, we're doing pretty well. Anything orange is we've got a problem. And if you look at kind of the shape of that, that's an interesting little curve that develops as you look across the roles. The CISO, the person in charge, interestingly enough, feels fewer of them feel they need a complete overhaul or need significant improvement to integrate disaster recovery backup into their cybersecurity plans. Or less of it. Sorry, I got that exactly backwards. The CISO believes things are pretty good, but when you get into the trenches, that's a different story. And Matt, I mean, you've dealt with your upper management. Are they a bit optimistic when it comes to how well integrated cybersecurity is and disaster recovery and backup?
I believe there are, and there's a little bit of a gap between, you know, the technical and the executive level. So in an executive level, having backup is a lot of like a yes or no answer.
Check mark, right? Bullet point.
Right, it's a check mark. So I can see where that figure is like that. Not saying that they don't know what they're talking about. It's just that they have no reason to dive in, you know, and get really technical with it. They just want to know if it's happening or not. But like you said, if you ask somebody that's in the trenches, there's multiple layers of it, and it weaves together really nice with your cybersecurity. So I can see where those numbers and where you get that curve from. That
could be rationalized there. I think it's interesting when you look at specifically the security professional. Obviously, most organizations of any size they've developed cybersecurity playbooks, operational manuals, workflows that should clearly define how things should happen, at least at some very much down to the click. Others, as they're developing, are more conceptual, at least Venn diagrams of how things should flow. I think there's a lot of value for the data protection professional that can add to this conversation and really complete that cybersecurity, both the strategy and then the operational playbooks. Any thoughts on how you are engaging your counterparts on the cyber side, or making that happen a little bit more seamless?
Yeah, with recently getting a Veeam certification, the training that I went through, it was very enlightening on the things that we can do with Veeam, and take the the scale out backup repository, how versatile and vast that you can make that, and the more pieces that you put in it, and the more sectors that you have in your entire backup, is going to make it that much stronger. And that's why I think that you're seeing that 19% of the backup administrators, you have a think that you're not doing enough. That just goes to show you that having a backup administrator and having a product that has a large offering, as far as scalability, as far as different encryption levels, and different ways to back up all of your data, it's it's going to make it that much better. And yeah. I'd put a lot of value in your backup administrator.
Yeah, when it comes right down to it, who is the person that's going to save the enterprise? That is literally that person. I think this is a good, just a good talking point that really earns the data protection team a seat at the table, and drives home the fact those that really know what's happening and are going to save the organization have a huge level of discomfort when it comes to their ability to integrate and make sure that they're funded, operationally ready to do these types of things. That pushing 20% of backup administrators are saying we need a complete overhaul. That's a bit scary. So I throw these out as good numbers that can be used as a benchmark for your organizations. I would encourage you, the call to action is, kick that door down to that cybersecurity team, make sure they really understand what's going on and what it takes to come back from ransomware. But we'll move on. That's, again, a great report, and I would really encourage you to look at that ransomware trends report. Last one. So these are global numbers. These aren't specific to healthcare. Well, I take back the first one. The first one is that globally, we found that 76% of organizations had at least one ransomware attack in the last year, and that's broad. I bet if we drilled down into the responses and asked, looked at who had one last month and last week and yesterday or the last hour, I think those numbers would continue to reign, right up there, close to that 76%. That's pretty big. The thing that's concerning is when contrast that against the measure of how much data was unrecoverable when ransomware hits. Now, this is a healthcare specific statistic, so we ask it globally, but this is healthcare, and I'm just checking my notes here just to make sure I got this right. But the 36% of data was left unrecoverable in healthcare after a ransomware attack. Now, I'm contrasting that on here in my notes with the global number, and actually it's the same. So props to the healthcare industry with low funding, antiquated architecture and equipment sometimes, and low body counts of warm bodies to take care of things when things go wrong. With all those factors against you, you're actually scoring about the same as your counterparts as far as protecting the majority of your data. Now, that's the good news, you can say that, but the flip side is 36% of data remaining unrecoverable is really, really scary. Matt, how would that discussion go after ransomware attack in your organization? If you came back with a study and simulated an attack and said, well, we can get about 36% of our data back based on this.
No, I could see the PACS administrator sweating bullets when I said that. There and really any of the directors in all the different departments, that would not go over. That would not go over very well.
Not fly very well. Would be interesting for budgetary conversations going into the next year, but I think it'd be uncomfortable all around. But again, we look at this year after year, so stay tuned. We'll see this again next year, and I'm sure we'll have this conversation again, and hopefully these numbers with Veeam's help and the industry's help and great partners, these numbers will drop more into the positive. And with that, Matt, your insight is interesting, and kind of that's the setup. I'd love to hear. I think our audience would like to hear more about your experience. You recently went through an evaluation and implementation of Veeam. Maybe just take a couple of minutes. We've got some slides queued up, and walk us through your impressions and what your big takeaways were.
Sure. So, like it says on the slide, I'm going to consider us a smaller hospital. We've got 418 beds and about 3,000 employees. So we had a different vendor for backups for years, and the role of backup administrator fell on me, and I decided that it was a good time to do a complete overhaul with our backups. Honestly, the number one reason was because I didn't know how to use the current solution that we had, and the more that I dove into it, I found out that it was not set up properly, and I just wanted to redo it. So in doing that, I wanted to see what else was available. So of course, that's what led me to Veeam. And looking at what they had to offer and their pricing models, we decided to go with them, and we did a complete overhaul. So we also recently started our own cybersecurity team in the IT department. We haven't always had one. So additional funds allowed me, like I said before, to go through the Veeam certification, and the training that was offered in that. It gave me so many tools I'm going to call it an arsenal to implement over here. Yeah. So the Veeam will drive home the 32110 rule. I have at least 3 copies of backups, 2 of them in different locations, and 1 of them being offsite locations. And then the other one is to have one that's air gap, basically. So what we wound up doing, not to get into a long technical conversation, but we house our backups on site. We replicate them offsite into Azure, and then we just recently started using immutable storage, and all of that came from Veeam. We're actually using a guide that Veeam just released, and it's going to be available in version 12, but version 11 I think implemented the immutability by using Linux storage devices, and letting Veeam control that immutable tag. Saved us a lot of money. There are other vendors that will sell you immutable storage, and I mean, they're perfectly fine. They just didn't fit us as far as our budget. So it was nice to have that option there. Again,
certainly back to that do more with less budget seems to be a common theme we hear with healthcare.
It is, and Veeam does a really good job at making sure that you're taking advantage of everything that they offer. I have a call every month with our success rep, and she will have a technical person every once in a while that'll come on, and we'll go through all of our sets and make sure everything's done right. If there's any suggestions they make, then they make it. So it's been really good, and it's been an ongoing relationship with Veeam. It's not just something that you buy and then they forget about you. You're going to develop you're going to develop a really good relationship with Veeam as you move forward with it.
Gotcha. Tell us a little bit about healthcare is unique in that there are so many data sources, and we can project just an explosion of many more. I mean, even down to personal applications. I know it's not a thing here, but I mean, just for the sake of discussion, interesting things are happening in Europe, for instance. The healthcare providers can prescribe, and it's covered by insurance applications. There is a set list of applications, for instance, that I can put on my phone that my subscription will be covered by my insurance company. Anxiety, prescription management, weight loss, overall healthcare. I could foresee this happening kind of worldwide. But I mean, even without the phone applications, I mean, tell us a little bit about the different types of data you're protecting.
Okay, so we protect with our PAC stuff. We protect DICOM images through the through that imaging software. And sorry, I'm not well versed with PACs, but I know that that those images take up a lot of space and that they're critical. We have about 700 servers, virtual servers that we back up with Veeam. That's part of that gets replicated in the cloud as well. Let's see here. We have our file share system. We haven't 100% moved to cloud as far as our files, with OneDrive. So we're still using a network storage for our file shares. And as a backup administrator, that's the majority of the tickets that I get, unfortunately, is the end users that mistakenly delete a document or something like that. So I constantly get tickets on that, and I wanted to go to share with that. Another thing that Veeam will offer you is Veeam One, and it's a web-based platform that runs in on your local infrastructure, and our help desk is able to go in and locate the file that needs to be recovered, and they can do it while they're on the phone with the people. It's great. You can push it out to your end users. We decided not to do that, but it eliminates a whole ton of tickets coming to your backup administrator and spending all day going through and restoring Excel documents and stuff that that end users have mistakenly deleted. So yeah, a lot of time saving stuff. Yeah.
I was going to say, so when you talk about recovery speed, we're not just talking about when disaster strikes, right?
No, I mean, it's
natural disasters, there's personal disasters.
I mean, it's great to be ready for a disaster. That's what the end goal is. But how can it help you when there's not a disaster? Does it just sit there and you just no, it doesn't. It's not stagnant. It's something that I use every single day, that the help desk uses every single day.
Fantastic. Let's, and for our attendees also, Veeam actually did quite an extensive interview and study with South Georgia Medical Center. Maybe tell us a little bit about the results. I mean, we talked a little bit about your goals and the scenario. What are some kind of outstanding and highlights you'd share, the big takeaways from the implementation now use of Veeam?
All right, so the big takeaways. We now have encryption. I hate to say it, but our backups previously were not encrypted.
You're not alone. I didn't share that stat, but you're not alone.
It's fun. I mean, it's if we don't learn from our mistakes, I don't think that we're doing it right. So, but that was one of the huge things. Is now we're HIPAA compliant with it. So yeah. Of course, yeah, the imaging and diagnostic data, sometimes we have to roll back. If the DICOM system has updates, we've done this more than once. Something goes bad with an update, instead of trying to uninstall it and find out what's going on, we'll do what's called an instant recovery in Veeam. If you're not familiar with what that is, I highly recommend you look that up. because that's one of the best things that Veeam offers. It is what it says it is. It's an instant recovery. And if you want to ask questions about it at the end, I'll be glad to go into detail with it. But one more thing I wanted to hint on is Office 365. Another thing that I was not aware of is that Microsoft does not back up your data. And I felt that, if we're entrusting our email and everything with Microsoft, that they would have a backup copy of it. That was not the case.
Don't feel bad. I think if we had a polling question on this, you would, again, not be alone on that one.
I was beside myself. It's in the fine print. It's up to you to make sure that your data is backed up. So I highly recommend using Veeam for your Office 365. It'll do SharePoint, Teams, email, and OneDrive. So in addition to that, we use Veeam to leverage the litigation holds. Instead of having to pay the money for litigation holds in Office 365, you can go ahead and free up that license and give it to another user instead of retaining that license and having to pay for the E3 or E5 or whichever license that you're using. As long as you're help me, the policy, as long as the retention policy is in place, that email will stay there. So if you ever need to retrieve it, then you take it out and attach it to the license and get what you need without having to pay all those Microsoft fees for litigation holds. Yep. And tying up licenses for users that aren't even at your organization anymore.
And that's a very, very interesting use case. And we were talking, I was speaking earlier with Matt when we were prepping for this and our discussion, just the irony that Matt ends up paying for legal issues, right? All of a sudden, he's not just worried about having to fund just the hardware and staffing and software and licensing fees. He's all of a sudden legal issues all are affecting his budget. So I'm sure you're not alone there as well. So thank you, Matt. I really appreciate that. We're going to move over. We've talked a lot of conceptually now about why ransomware, how it's affecting kind of the state of the state, what you're seeing from your perspective. Chris, why don't you take us home and share more about how Veeam allows our users to protect themselves and recover for ransomware?
Yeah, certainly. So when we talk about ransomware, I think of it as ransomware is a disaster, right? And similar to fire, flood, and blood, it's taking your services offline. The difference between a ransomware attack and, say, a fire is that a ransomware attack requires you to get the rest of your team involved, right? Senior leadership is involved, probably driving the conversation. The security folks are doing their investigation. HR, legal, and even sometimes marketing gets involved because you have to communicate to the world what's going on to retain that customer confidence, or in the case of healthcare, patient confidence. And finally, we get to actually recovering data. And even in that case, it's not as simple as simply clicking the recover button and moving forward. And so when I think about ransomware protection and ransomware recovery, I think about the capabilities that are involved, and Matt hit on them, right, in terms of things like immutability, the 32110 rule, instant recovery, being able to restore securely, and being able to orchestrate all of that together. And so the reason that that's important is not just in healthcare, but in business in general. Organizations are more likely to pay a ransom than they are to rely on their backups for recovery. And the reason for that is that the backups are perceived, and in some cases are really slow, and it's considered to be faster, and I'll use air quotes,
yeah,
to pay the ransom and kind of hope for the best.
So your disaster recovery plan is the ransomware.
Is a hope and a prayer. So Matt mentioned immutability. You know, and immutability, if you want to jump to the next slide, immutability is the latest, I'll call it buzzword for backup. Everybody's talking about it. Some folks don't even know that it exists. I know a lot of folks, I come out of the security world, so a lot of folks in my world, they may have heard the term, but it's the backup person's problem.
Yeah.
And truly, the ability to have an immutable backup is what's going to ensure that the data is in fact there when you need to recover it. And as Matt mentioned, you know, there's a lot of vendors out there that will sell you a box. For us, we look at it as being needing to be flexible in how we design our immutability. And we talk, in some cases, we talk about having immutability everywhere. As a matter of fact, my good friend Rick Vanover talks about, you know, double and triple play immutability. It's essentially having the ability to have immutable storage at different layers of your environment. And we see that as a benefit because you're not locked into specific hardware, specific drives, in some cases, you know, spindle versus flash, that type of thing. And you can truly customize your recovery strategy to your needs. And that takes us to our next slide, which is that 3-2-1-1-0 rule. Matt mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again. As a matter of fact, when I first joined Veeam last year, I was talking with our tech support folks, and consistently the one thing that they told me that they wish every customer would do is follow this rule, because having multiple copies of your data on different types of media, having one offsite, having it, some of it immutable or air gapped, and making sure that you had 0 errors during your backup is going to be the thing that allows you to at least get some of your data back, hopefully all of it, in that worst case scenario. And inevitably, what we find is that the folks who are not following these best practices are the ones who are losing data. And so, you know, if there was one thing that I could share with our audience is you need to put this best practice in place. Now, one of the things that we tend to focus on, I think it's a little bit underrated, quite honestly, is the ability to ensure that your backup, the data that you're backing up, is actually backed up. And it seems simplistic. And if you want to jump to the next slide, Jason, we found in our ransomware survey that the vast majority of organizations were not verifying that their data was backed up. As a matter of fact, most organizations are trusting the job logs. Mm-hmm. But the job log only tells you that the job completed. It doesn't tell you that you know, data was actually backed up, or it doesn't tell you that the data was recoverable, which is even more important, right? Because you could back up petabytes of data, and if it isn't backed up correctly and it's corrupted, it's not even worth the disk space. So we want to make sure that we're verifying those backups, that we're making sure that not only did the job complete, but that the data is in fact ready to be recovered. Because at the end of the day, that's the key. And we want to be able to do this automatically. We want to add in automation, because as Matt mentioned, and we've even seen it in the ransomware report, most organizations have scripts running. They're kind of kludging together their own processes. And as a CISO friend of mine would always say, you know, the scripts are great until the person who wrote it got hit by a bus, and then it just all falls apart, right? So being able to have a consistent policy or consistent process that's automated is key for us. And so when we talk about backup verification, that's really what we're talking about.
I
And
know
that,
that sorry, just I would inject.
oh,
I was at HIMSS earlier this year, and one conversation distinctly stands out in my mind more than others. It was an admin that came in. They had adopted Veeam about a year ago, and as they became more, as they implemented more and more, he said he just expressed the level of I don't know if it was relief, confidence, but to say that he would get a report on a regular basis and understood exactly what their recovery stance posture was, their readiness, and being able to almost, I can't remember if it was a daily or what interval he was running, but he would proactively engage with his management and say, we're covered, I've got it. He said that has been game changing for him. Never in his career did he have any type of tool or level of confidence on a regular basis on their ability to recover. I mean, so that alone, I mean, it changes the way, a whole IT department and a flow of responsibility even works. Period.
absolutely, absolutely. And that leads us actually to the next point is that, this talks about detecting signs of ransomware, but the ability to understand what's really happening is key for recoverability. And it's not even, it's interesting because we talk about backup windows, we talk about backup speed, but the reason that we're backing up data is to recover it. And so knowing that you've got the alarms just out of the box for possible ransomware activity or backup issues, network performance, that type of thing, isn't making us a security tool, but it's allowing us to be more proactive with that security team, because quite honestly, the vast majority of ransomware attacks don't start with, lights blinking and alarms going off. It starts with somebody saying, hey, my laptop's acting funny. Or they get the good old blue screen of death. So this is just another way that we can augment the security tools that are out there and further understand what's happening with our backup environment. And actually, as part of that, we talk a lot about orchestration, and as part of our our backup and recovery processes, we're essentially talking about reducing risk, right? And the way that you reduce risk is to verify what you assume, or to put it another way, you eliminate your assumptions.
Yeah.
And so by using tools like orchestration tools, Veeam has a disaster recovery orchestrator. And actually, if you want to jump to the next slide there, we can automatically prove out and test that we're ready to go. And not only that, and this is, as someone who's written a lot of documentation in his life, the fact that we can take all of this testing and all of this information and turn it into an actual disaster recovery plan and automatically build the documentation, that warms my heart, I'll be honest. But the fact that this can all be automated is hugely important, because in my experience anyways, any process that's manual and that's mundane gets dropped or gets put on the back burner, because we've got more important things to do. It gets deprioritized. So let's take those mundane tasks, let's automate them, and let's move on with our lives and make sure at the same time that we've reduced the overall risk to the organization. And then, my final piece is about recovery, and Matt mentioned it as well. As to date, we've counted out that we've got 91 different ways to recover data, and it's nice to know it's there. I've never met a single person who's going to use more than 3. But it's nice to know that we've got options, and it's nice to know that because of our recovery speed and because of the flexibility in being able to choose our hardware and map our infrastructure to I'll call it the business need, we can essentially take these 91 different options and make them the better decision or the better choice than paying a ransom. And so, well, and that's our goal, right? So when we bring all of this together in the Veeam solution, we're providing that confidence level in order to say that yes, we are ready for a disaster. We're ready for a ransomware disaster or a natural disaster, but we're ready to go, and we're ready to make sure that we can recover from that ransomware disaster without having to pay the ransom.
I think this also speaks to, we always talk about people, processes, and products coming together. I think nowhere else or in other scenarios is that so urgent or poignant as, say, a ransomware attack. Organizations will have their cybersecurity playbooks, they'll have their operational manuals, right? It's nice to have a choice, a menu, if you will, that would be non-disruptive to an existing way of life, way of doing things, especially not requiring somebody to rewrite how things should flow and work. And with options like this, that does make a lot of sense, especially or has high applicability within a
Absolutely.
ransomware.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about healthcare in particular, your main goal from my experience is what's the patient experience? What's the level of patient care that we can provide? And so if we can go in and say that we're going to be able to recover the data and not interrupt the patient's experience, then Matt, I think you'd agree with me that that's a win.
It is. It's a win, and I've been there. Being able to recover an entire virtual server in, I think we timed it at 4 minutes from the time that he said that he did something wrong to the time it took for it to come back up.
Something wrong.
Yep. It was 4 minutes, and it was back online.
Fantastic.
For real quick, on Chris's point on automation, I do want to point out that one of my favorite tools in here is Veeam's extensive libraries of PowerShell modules that they have built into them. Not every company goes to the length of building their own PowerShell module. So if you're a fan of PowerShell and doing scripts and automation and stuff like that, you do have that choice with Veeam. It's very nice.
That flexibility. Good.
Yep.
Good. So, Chris, you want to take us home?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry. So this is when we're talking about our solutions in health, the world of healthcare. We're talking about doing this at scale. And so when we're looking at patient care, we want to make sure that whether you've got 300 patients or 20,000 patients, you're able to have the same level of experience. And so you can see here, these are just some of the marquee customers that we have beyond that, that are using Veeam in order to make sure that they're managing that patient experience in the most efficient way possible. And so when we're talking about solving the challenges of healthcare, what we're really bringing together is the ability to have that assured protection, making sure that you're ready for an attack, making sure that when that attack comes, that you can recover, and you can recover quickly, and make sure that you know we've got our data back, you know, in its entirety, reducing that number of that 36% number of data loss down to 0. And interestingly enough, in the ransomware trends report that we just released, 19% of organizations were able to recover their data without having to pay a ransom. And so, you know, we've kind of looked at that as a challenge to take that number and increase it over the next year. So I'm really hoping that when we do this same report next year, that we've put a big dent in that number. But, you know, all this together, we're focusing on reducing those operational costs. You know, there's enough going on in the healthcare world that we don't need to be an added burden to the IT organization. And, you know, pulling that together with the ability to maintain compliance. Matt, you mentioned about being HIPAA compliant because you're encrypting your backups. You know, that's key. And so we want to bring all of this together so that you're not just backing up your data, you're making sure that it's available no matter what and no matter when you need it.
Excellent point. Well, thank you, Chris and Matt. That's a nice summation of data protection and modernizing data protection in healthcare. Sarah, we've got a couple of minutes for Q&A. Just a couple. I think we've answered a couple as they've rolled in. Do we have any we've left unanswered?
Yeah, I'm not sure if we got to this one. There was one chatted around here. Let me just read it to y'all. And if we got to it, my apologies. But we use Veeam, but we were not aware there is a feature in Veeam to alarm of incidents. How can we test this feature? Is it functioning?
So that's a good question. So and I'm looking at the questions right here. So that's a feature within Veeam 1. So what you can do is if you've got Veeam 1, you can contact our customer success folks, and they can help you get that set up, make sure that it's running properly.
And that's a pretty interesting component of it. Chris, you talked about diagnosing, I'll use medical terms here, diagnosing ransomware from early symptoms. That's Veeam 1 is that monitoring, management, and alerting component of our Veeam solution. It fills that bill very nicely, and in fact, it'll also offer remediation steps when incidents are created. So it's all the alarm and alert management. It's very good stuff. One more question I know rolled in. HIPAA. HIPAA is an interesting topic. When it hit, you know, there's a lot of fury on and scramble to understand it. HIPAA still is pretty simple from a requirements standpoint because a lot of it's conceptual, isn't it, Matt? It's when you look at the requirements themselves, you're talking about these simple statements. Must be able to, you know, protect. Must be able to recover. It's a lot of what, but not a lot of how, isn't it?
You're right. It is, and I'll be the first to tell you that I don't know the HIPAA book cover to cover, but from what I was told my duties were is to make sure that it was recoverable and to make sure that it was encrypted, and that pretty much made everybody else happy in compliance as far as backups are concerned.
Yeah, and that's quite often the case. Again, it's not the how, it's the what you have to do. So when your HIPAA compliance officer or team comes knocking, right, being able to explain and prove your recovery and protection stance, you know, prove the encryption, show the policy, show the retention policy, show the testing policy. All those things are part of that being HIPAA ready and complying with those mandates. Products aren't HIPAA certified, right?
I don't know if we mentioned it, but the sure backup is the way that we do that as far as testing the backups tested the recovery of them. You might, how do you know it's recoverable? We use Sure Backup, and I would, if you have Veeam, I would, and you're not using Sure Backup, I would start, because it's a very nice tool to have, as well as Veeam One. Now, I mean, Veeam One will, if you turn every notification on that thing, it'll notify you about every little single thing. So do like what I recommend doing. What Chris said is reach out to your success manager and make sure you get somebody to come in there and help you tune that thing, because it will 100% do what you're wanting it to do as far as alerts.
It'll give you everything or just what you need. So
yeah.
Good call out. Okay, maybe I'll just wrap things up. A couple of things I would offer as great.
Sorry, Jay. We do actually have, we have a couple more questions. So one's for Matt specifically. Matt, I only caught part of the discussion about using Veeam to offset some Office 365 licensing costs. Would you go over that one more time?
Yes, really. More specifically, it's the litigation holds, and we found out. Of course, we always find out the hard way. That's how I work. So if you remove a license from somebody for an employee that is either terminated or leaves or whatever, right when you remove that license, the data's gone from Office 365. So you have to have a license attached to it in order to retain it. Now, in healthcare, it's hard to tell who you're going to need to recover emails from. So the litigation holds get really expensive for us in Office 365. So what we've done is we just make sure that we have a retention policy in Veeam for our 365 stuff, and we don't have to use those litigation holds. Whenever we need to recover something, we recover it from Veeam onto we recover it back to an account and put a license with it, and the data's back, and we can extract what we need out of it for that. So it's the litigation holds is basically what we were saving ourselves from.
Gotcha. Very interesting use case there.
Right.
Sarah, you had another one?
Yes. This person would like to hear more about instant recovery. I currently have Veeam backing up on site and then to the cloud, but I've yet to try to do a restore and have no idea how long that will take. Also, more about recognizing a ransomware attack. How are you doing that exactly? Is it similar to an EDR solution?
So I was actually, I'm putting a link to a blog article in the question. And so you should see that. But instant recovery is essentially taking your backup VM image and is mounting it in the backup infrastructure. And I'm oversimplifying it, but that's kind of what it is. So you need the disk and the processor and everything in the backup environment in order to mount it and start it running. So that's one recovery option. And like Matt said, you can get back a VM in 4 minutes. Is it great for I'd say under 10 VMs, just as kind of a limiter? Yes. Would I want to restore 100 VMs with it? No. Not unless I had a lot of horsepower behind it.
You have to specifically for that failover.
You definitely need to architect it for that use case. As far as detection of ransomware, we have our alarms in Veeam 1, but we also have the ability to scan the backups during backup and during recovery for malware. And so we are not an EDR solution, we're not an AV solution, but we can take advantage of the solutions that you have on in-house in order to do that scanning. And so one of the other pieces, and this is probably more information that you want, but tools, there's tools out there that allow you to insert IOCs or even YARA rules and things like that to do a scan. So if you've got a tool that will do, I'll call it non-demand scan or scheduled scan, you can use it to scan your backups and scan your data during recovery. Where that gets interesting is in the incident response process. You've got a lot of folks who are doing the investigation. They're going to find those indicators of compromise. So you're going to end up looking for something fairly specific, so that you're not scanning, hundreds of VMs or hundreds of disks or what have you. So you can be pretty prescriptive about it. So hopefully that answers the question, and let me
drop a couple of links in there, and also to that to the viewer, definitely get with your partner and work with them. They can definitely walk you through those workflows, the decision-making process around how to do that. That's a big value of Veeam, and we really would encourage all customers to be very well familiar with that instant recovery, to be able to fail over and keep the lights on while you figure out what happens on the production side of things. So good stuff. We are right up against the top of the hour, so I'm going to move us along. Couple of notes. We will make the slides available. Sarah will provide us, and the team will provide you with link to a PDF for today's slides, so you can use them. We've got links in here also to other documents and great resources you should be looking at. We definitely want to talk about Veeam On, which is now on demand. It's our large user conference. Those sessions are available today. We're adding more all the time, so make sure you're out on Veeam On and looking at the technical sessions. To the viewer that want to know how to do it, I guarantee we have a session on how to use instant recovery, especially in the ransomware side of the equation. So these will be active links. You can see that. I also included a couple of resources that we have, everything from kind of a best practices 7 capabilities that you'll need to fight ransomware, an overview of what we do for healthcare in general for data protection, as well as references to healthcare customer stories, and then the 2 reports that we pulled data from. And again, these are third-party generated. We format it, but it's all done through blind research through a third party that does huge studies around ransomware and data protection. And again, we see these being used as rationales for driving business level discussions, baselines for comparing how well one company is doing against the rest of the world. We have a general report that has global numbers for ransomware. We didn't segment that out to specifically the healthcare industry, but we do have our data protection trends report that was that launched earlier this year. We did break out the healthcare numbers, so you can specifically look at how you're doing against your peers in the industry with that report. And again, we hope those are beneficial for you, not just for evaluating Veeam, but really plotting your business around data protection. And with that, we want to say thank you. This has been a great session. Matt, thank you for joining us. You carved a good hour out of your day today, and your insight was very valuable and really added a lot of color, real life color to the concepts that we talked about.
I don't do this just for any vendor.
That's good.
I did it because I believe in the product. So
that is the best compliment I think somebody can give a product they're using. So thank you. We appreciate that. Chris, thank you for jumping on and walking us through more of the strategy and conceptual ideas around fighting ransomware. The great summary of what Veeam can provide our customers. So with that, we will sign off and say thank you.
Thank you.